Welcome to All Things with Jen Oshman, where we look at current events and trends through a Christian lens. All things were created through Jesus and for Jesus, so we're seeking to apply His word to what's happening here and now. This episode of All Things is brought to you by Crossway, publisher of the new book, Digital Liturgies, Rediscovering Christian Wisdom in an Online Age by Samuel James. With advancements in internet technology, people can get instant answers to just about any of their questions, connect long distance with family and friends, and stay informed with events around the world in real time. In Digital Liturgies, tech-realist Samuel James examines the connection between patterns in technology and human desires. Everyone longs for a glimpse of heaven. He argues they are just looking for it in the wrong place, the internet. Samuel highlights the inherent dangers of digital technologies, offering wisdom for navigating our internet saturated world. This accessible book offers a biblical view of the internet and technology and is a great resource for college students, parents, and pastors alike. Pick up a copy of Digital Liturgies wherever books are sold or visit crossway.org/plus and get 30% off with your Crossway Plus account. So, on this episode of All Things, we're actually going to chat with author Samuel James about the internet, technology, smartphones, and all of that. I know this is something that interests all of you because whenever I do an episode about smartphones or screen time, I get a lot of feedback from all of you guys. You probably have a smartphone in your pocket right now, and you're definitely connected to the internet as you listen to this show, and I'm connected to the internet as I record it. So, I know it's something we are all pondering all the time. This is our reality. We are always connected. And we're navigating it not just for ourselves, but also for those that we love. I mean, we're worried about our own souls, our own daily lives, but also that of maybe our older parents or the accountability of our friends and peers, people that we care about, and definitely our kids, our teens, our young adults, our youngest children. All of us are online all the time. So, specifically, when we talk to Samuel, we're going to ask how that connectivity is shaping us, how it is affecting us, our brains, our souls, everyday life. But before we hear from him, I wanted to present you all with some of the data, some numbers and research regarding just how connected we are and how it's impacting us. Okay, so in 1997, that's actually the year after I graduated from high school, just 26 years ago, about 21% of Americans said they had used the internet in the last 3 months. I remember as a freshman, the internet being totally new. We would go to the computer lab, we would dial up, and it was a struggle to get news or even to send an email. We definitely were not doing our research papers online as you can do now. So that was 1997. Picture it with me. 1 in 5 Americans using the internet in the past 3 months. So by 2007, fast forward 10 years, that percentage was up to 75% of Americans had used it in the last 3 months. By 2018, over 85% of Americans, or about 250 million people, were using the internet at least semi regularly. And now, 85% of US adults report being online every single day. And about 30%, a third of us, say that we are online almost constantly. So, in one generation, we've gone from most of us not using this technology to almost everyone using it. It's a massive shift for humanity, which is hard to really see and feel because we are immersed in these changes as they take place. So, you probably know this. I bet you've heard this before. But even though we are now connected more than ever, we are lonelier and more isolated than ever. According to many studies, there's so much data out there about this. Teens and young adults in our current American society feel significantly lonelier and more isolated than generations prior. So, what do you guys think? Are real friendships a thing of the past? Fewer young adults, actually, in wealthy countries, not just the United States, but wealthy developed countries around the world, are choosing to not get married and to not start their own families. Some are delaying it, some are skipping it altogether. But meanwhile, when it comes to the internet, it's never been easier in human history to connect with another person, to have a relationship with someone who's very far away, or to connect with someone right here, to hook up with someone right here, to do business with someone who's very close by. So connectivity is up, but so is loneliness. Here's an interesting quote from Elon Musk. He says, to some degree, We are already a cyborg. You think of all the digital tools that you have, your phone, your computer, the applications that you have, the fact that you can ask a question and instantly get an answer from Google and other things. Musk rightly observes that we're all very dependent on the internet and all of our digital tools. I know I am. Musk argues our digital dependence is effectively already part of our neural biology, so our brain makeup, affecting the way we think. He points out that our digital selves will outlive our physical selves. He said, if you die, your digital ghost is still around. All of your emails and social media, they still live even if you die. Okay, Nicholas Carr, he is the author of the book called The Shallows, which is about the internet. He wrote an article prior to The Shallows for The Atlantic back in 2018, so 15 years ago. And the article was entitled, Is Google Making Us Stupid? In the article, he laments how his brain had changed. He could no longer concentrate for long periods of time or think deeply as he once could. He blamed his digital connectivity. The scrolling and options and windows to click were reforming his brain such that deep thinking was becoming less and less doable. I can relate to that too. Can you guys? Well, in 2018, research out of the United Kingdom shows that people now check their phones on average every 12 minutes during their waking hours. 71% of people say they never turn their phone off, and 40% say they check their phones within 5 minutes of waking up in the morning. Okay, here's another new term for you, maybe continuous partial attention. This is a phrase that was coined by the ex Apple and Microsoft consultant Linda Stone. She says by adopting an always on, anywhere, anytime, any place behavior when it comes to the internet, we are in a constant state of alertness. We are always scanning, always skimming, always checking on things, but we're never really fully giving our attention to anything. This full on connectivity is obviously affecting not just our ability to concentrate, but it's affecting our sleep, our work, our physical health, our relationships. Here is something interesting that I learned from Samuel's book. Parents are increasingly aware of how bad digital connectivity is for their kids, especially in Silicon Valley. It's becoming routine there where all of the tech executives live and inventors. It's becoming increasingly routine there for parents to have their nannies sign a no phone use contract. So here's a quote from Lynn Perkins, the CEO of Urban Sitter. She says, the people who are closest to tech are the most strict about it at home. Nannies must agree not to use any screen for any purpose in front of the child that they are caring for. Well, moving on from young children to older kids, I have really appreciated and benefited from the work of sociologist Jean Twenge over the last several years. I've quoted her in my books and on this podcast. She documented the rise in teen anxiety and depression in her 2016 book called iGen. So, iGen includes Americans born in 1995 or later. Twenge says there's a quote, epidemic anguish in this generation. Listen to these numbers. 56% more teens experienced a major depressive episode in 2015 than in 2010. And 60% more experienced severe impairment. So just in 5 years, depression went up 56%. Serious impairment went up 60%. In 2007, about 0.8%, so not even 1% of females ages 12 to 14 died by suicide. In 2015, the number for the same age group was 2.5%, 3 times. Twenge says the sudden sharp rise in depressive symptoms occurred at almost exactly the same time that smartphones became ubiquitous and in-person interaction plummeted. Twenge has a new book out this year. It's called Generations. In the book, she analyzes mental health trends for 5 different age groups from the silent generation. So those were people who were born between 1925 and 1945, all the way to Gen Z. So those who were born between 1995 and 2012. She shows definitively that the way teens spend their time outside of school fundamentally changed in 2012. In 2009, only about half of teens used social media every day. In 2017, 85% used it daily. By 2022, 95% of teens said they use some social media, and about a third say they use it constantly. So 95% of teens are using social media, and about 33% say they use it all the time. Now, in the most recent data, 22% of 10th grade girls, so we're talking 15-year-old girls, spend 7 or more hours a day on social media, which Twingy says means many teenage girls are sleeping, going to school, and going on social media. Twingy says every indicator of mental health and psychological well-being has become more negative among teens and young adults since 2012. The trends are stunning in their consistency, breadth, and size, she says. So since 2010, anxiety, depression, and loneliness have all increased amongst teens. And it's not just that symptoms rose, but also behaviors, including emergency room visits for self-harm, for suicide attempts, and completed suicides. This data only goes through 2019, so none of this discouragement is related to COVID-19. Parents, and I'm speaking to myself, I've got one teen left at home. We have to be so vigilant and so careful with the decisions we make about our teens and phones and social media. I'm just not sure it's worth it to grant this kind of access to digital connectivities for our teens. Of course, teens are not the only ones shaped by the use of social media. I am sure everyone listening to this has felt discouraged or angered or triggered by social media at some point. I know I have. Tristan Harris is a former Google engineer who has become very critical of social media's effect on us. I read about him in Samuel's book. He explains how social media algorithms are designed to keep us scrolling and engaged by overwhelming us with negative emotions, anger, disagreement, outrage, fear. These things keep us scrolling rather than logging off. Things that anger us get the most clicks. So the artificial intelligence of the algorithm knows that. So the more outrageous or the more upsetting the content, the more we stay online. And then whatever outlet produced that outrageous content gets the most traffic, makes the most money from both users and advertisers. Our clicking because of fear or our clicking because of anger reinforces the algorithm so that every time we log on, we get more of the same. In fact, social media definitely wants you to keep scrolling or scrolling. Maybe you have heard the term infinite scroll. This is a neurologically influenced web tool. So it's a tool that has been influenced by the way our brains work, that rewards users as they dive deeper into a feed, giving us new sights and sounds as the page grows. Samuel James says this makes the web an endless novelty machine. He says, emotionally numbed by endless scrolling, the human heart tends to become inclined toward that which simply offers a dash of color to an otherwise drab listlessness. The Wall Street Journal actually recently did a deep dive into TikTok's algorithm. Turns out it's highly sophisticated, and the app captures even when you pause momentarily while scrolling. So if you pause even just for less than a second, that triggers the algorithm to recommend more videos like that. Additionally, the Wall Street Journal found that the TikTok algorithm pushes more sexual and adult content, even when that kind of content is not initially recommended. It's the design of TikTok that individual accounts are led gradually to more extreme content on the app. And of course, pornography is one way to keep people hooked online. According to Statista, 3 of the top 20 most visited websites in the world are adult sites, accounting for over 4 billion visits every single month. Oh man, this is a lot of heavy data. Well, let's turn now to my conversation with Samuel. We're going to wade through these realities, which, if I'm honest, feels so discouraging right now. If you can, listen all the way to the end because Samuel is going to close us out with some really helpful gospel truths. He's going to remind us that while the technology is new, our God is sovereign and he knew this was coming. He gives us his word and his spirit so that we can navigate these modern day realities with wisdom and truth. Now let's listen in. Well, welcome everybody to All Things. And Samuel James, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast episode. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm really glad to be here.
So, Samuel, you and I know each other through Crossway, as you're an editor and I've written for Crossway, but you have written a book for Crossway now. And that's what I want to talk to you about. It's a book called Digital Liturgies. And it's something I find myself coming back to time and time again, just this theme, this topic of how am I using digital technology well? Is it using me? And I know our
Mhm.
listeners are really eager to dive into this conversation also. So, before we get into it, though, could you just introduce yourself? Where are you? What do you do every day? Why do you care about digital technology and our souls? Give us the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Jen. Yeah, so as you said, my name is Samuel James. I'm Associate Acquisitions and Developmental Editor at Crossway. I've been at Crossway for 6 years, half of which I spent in Wheaton, Illinois, which is where we met near the Crossway offices. And for the last 3 years, my wife, Emily, and I have been living with our kids in Louisville, Kentucky, which is our hometown. We go to Third Avenue Baptist Church here in Louisville. And yeah, I've been thinking and writing about this particular topic for the last few years. I think particularly drawn by some of the things that I've seen in the church and in American culture, especially maybe around 2016 and kind of the political landscape that seemed to really become more explosive. And then just kind of noticing some of the ways in which social media in particular was kind of alluring me and people close to me to say and do and think things that were not something that we would otherwise feel or think. And
Mm.
so just been thinking about that in the context of the life of the church and then broadening it out, especially in this book, to consider what the Bible says about wisdom and how living wisely might be challenged by the kind of technology that we just take for granted that we instinctively give our attention to each day.
Yeah, good. Well, I know that that's something everybody listening, I mean, most people are probably listening on a smartphone even as we
Mhm.
speak. So I know this is something they care about. They'll probably click out of here and go check social media. So this is a conversation that's really relevant for all of us. Samuel, I'm wondering, have you ever known life without access to the internet? Can you personally remember a time before you Googled something or before you had social media?
Yeah, I definitely can. So I'm one of the last generations that can remember a time before the internet. So my family, even by generational standards, was pretty slow on the uptake. We were a pastor's family in Owensboro, Kentucky, and we lived in the little church parsonage. And I remember very clearly the first kind of time that the internet came into our home. I was probably like 11 or 12, and it was dial up, and
Yeah.
everybody is, well, not everybody listening to this, but people of a certain age will remember just that unique crinkly sound and the white noise of trying to log on through your phone line. And my sisters and I would fight over who got to use the computer because that would tie up the phone line. So you're taking two kind of social tools at once. Um, so yeah, I remember a time without the internet, especially without social media. I joined Facebook, which was the first real kind of social media platform that I got involved in. I joined that senior year of high school. And so I know very plainly what it is to kind of have a social life and uh, interact with people when you can't just like go up and look up their profile later,
Mhm.
or
Right.
you have to call them, or if you want to tell them something. I didn't text until I was I think a senior in high school actually as well. Yeah. So a lot of things happened senior year.
Yeah.
But yeah, remember very clearly what life was like before these technologies just kind of created this instant connectivity to anybody I knew.
Yes. Okay. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you, are we the better for it or worse for it? But before I do that, and I know that you're going to give me a complicated answer to that question, but
That's right.
we have, 25 more minutes to talk about it. I want to share, and listener, I want you to lean in as I read this because Samuel identifies or defines the internet or maybe social media like this, and it's a really helpful definition. It's one I read and reread multiple times, but I think it really helps us sort of conceive of kind of what you just described, the life that's embodied and sort of in real life, and then the life that we live online. So this is how you define it: the disembodied electronic environment that we enter through connected devices for the purpose of accessing information, relationships, and media that are not available to us in a physical format. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? Because that's a lot to hear at once, but walk us through a bit what those words mean.
Yeah. So disembodied obviously refers to something that doesn't have a physical character. So that's the internet, right? So when I log on, whether I'm using social media or email or streaming, obviously these images and these videos and even other people are being represented to me, even though I'm not in the same room. I don't have proximity to a lot of this content. I'm not in the same room with this person, or I'm not right next to this thing that's being filmed. So there's a disembodied quality to it. And then we enter into that environment through connected devices, and so these devices can be different. We can enter it through a computer that has to be plugged into a certain location, and that was most people's experience of the internet for a long time. But then with Wi-Fi, now it becomes very mobile, and we can enter into these spaces whenever and wherever we are, with through phones and things that we can carry with us easily. So in order to kind of define what the web is, and I think in the book I make a distinction between the internet and the web. Most people are going to identify what I'm talking about as the web, social media, websites, that kind of thing. But the web is kind of downstream from this broader technology that says, uh, use this technology and you will overcome the limitations of your physical place. You can go and experience things that are far away from the comfort of your own home, or you can have kind of this relational proximity with someone who is not close to you. And so very close to the heart of understanding this technology is to understand the way it completely collapses distance, and we become disembodied as we enter into it, and we can seek out anything from movies and music to other people and to even worship services. So yeah, just understanding this technology as being something that takes away our bodies. It's kind of separates our who we are as mental people from who we are as physical people.
I do think that is really helpful because how much time do we spend, thinking about curating, creating our presence online? And yet that's not actually our real life. And so it does kind of blow my mind when I step back to think about it, that I'm going to go online to have this relationship, or I'm going to go online to present this idea, but it's not actually in my body right here in my space. And this is just a little thought that sometimes I have that's a bit off script. So forgive me. We can always edit it out if this goes poorly. But Samuel, sometimes I wonder about this same thing when it comes to like the invention of the car or the
Hmm.
airplane, that people, they existed in their bodies, but also in their communities or on their farm or in a physical place. But then we bring along this technology that removes us from a physical place and puts us in another physical place, and our bodies are there, but we've been removed. Do you see that connection? Like it sort of feels like that is this, but like 2.0.
Absolutely, yeah. There is an important continuity between um, technologies that displace us and
Yeah.
that kind of move us into different locations and kind of enable kind of almost a super physical kind of presence, and the internet. And Marshall McLuhan, the technology critic, made the observation that the jet engine is a radical kind of displacing technology. It creates a plausibility. So because of the jet engine, I could live in Louisville, Kentucky, but work in Chicago, Illinois, or even Los Angeles, California. And so the idea of the world as kind of being this inaccessible thing because I am here rooted in Louisville, Kentucky, that whole idea is rendered obsolete
Mm.
simply by the technology of a jet engine. And the same is true of obviously whether the telephone and railroads and things like that. But I think with the internet in particular, there is a there. This is just happening at a much wider scale, and it's happening at a more immersive scale. If I use an airplane or a train or something like that, certainly the world now feels smaller, and that creates a different kind of culture. It kind of creates a different relationship we have to space and geography and
Mm,
the concept of home. But the difference with the internet is that I can literally enter into any environment mentally at any time, and I don't have to even exert physical effort to do it. I
yeah.
don't have to buy a ticket. I don't have to be on a plane. And so the sense of being transported, the sense
Mhm.
of, oh, I'm actually leaving this place to arrive at somewhere else, that sense is being completely flattened by how this technology absorbs us. And so I think while there is continuity between older technologies and the way they kind of create this flat, disembodied world, the internet kind of takes these dynamics and does something way more immersive with them.
Yeah. I think that is so fascinating to consider. And just thinking about how it's the Lord who determined when and where we would live. He gave us these bodies and he put us in these specific places.
Right.
And yet we're going around that, whether it's with the jet engine or the internet. And not that it's, I'm not trying to make a value statement on it necessarily. But I do wonder, and this is my question for you that I said I wanted to ask, like, are we the better for it? Is this a net positive, or do you think it's a net negative when you sit back and think about it?
Yeah, and here's your complicated answer, right?
Right. Bring it on.
Yeah, I really don't know if the issue is one of better or worse. So one thing I try to express in the book is that technology is non-neutral, but that doesn't mean bad.
Mhm.
The reality for us is that information technologies that kind of directly affect how we learn and how we communicate, they shape us in fundamental ways, even if we're not aggressively consuming them. So, simply because you and I live in a culture that is shaped by these things, we are kind of absorbing the assumptions and the intuitions and the belief systems that come from these technologies that are kind of embedded into them. And whether you and I, are able to kind of separate from this and build, little analog lives for ourselves and, a farm somewhere and just kind of reject technology, even if we could do that, that would not change the kind of world that we live in. The world we live in is just permanently shaped by this. And so for me, it's less an issue of saying, oh, this technology is bad or this technology is not bad. The reality is that it just shapes my life. And so I'm
Mm,
trying to interrogate the ways in which these assumptions, these
mm,
abilities might be kind of tilting me away from the kind of life that the Bible calls me to. And in that sense, it's very similar to kind of deconstructing a culture and to try to find the places in a particular culture
mm,
that are kind of more resistant to biblical wisdom, and that can be true in any culture. It can be true
mhm.
in any type of group that you find. But we're just trying to interrogate that rather than think in binary terms of good or bad.
Right. Which is really counter to our current moment. And and that's just
Yeah.
evidence that we've been shaped by the technology around us because I think probably I'm guessing, I don't know, I haven't done an exhaustive study on that, but I think our nature is to want to pigeonhole things or to categorize things, put them in a
Yes.
nice, neat column, right? And it feels like now more than ever, we are drawn to that quick answer, cancel this, but don't cancel that, and say it like this, but don't say it
Yes.
like that. We have our black and white, and yet really very few things are black and white, and it
Hmm.
requires this deeper thinking and these deeper conversations. Well, I know you could go on for much longer than time permits, but can you just share with us some of the ways that we are being shaped? How am I impacted by the digital technology that's all around me? How has it changed me for the better or for the worse, or maybe even take those words right out of it, but how has it shaped me?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, and the book kind of talks about five different ways in which the assumptions of digital technology have shaped how we think and how we feel. So I think one of those that a lot of people can identify with is just the outrage and the kind of refusal to think carefully about things. And I
Mm,
think this is reflected even despite our best efforts. We tend to gravitate toward kind of this reactive thinking. So if somebody posts
Yeah.
something that I don't like, well, my assumption immediately is to make bad inferences about this person. This
Hmm.
person has gone liberal, or this person has gone fundamentalist. Uh, and so, kind of this highly reactive, highly explosive way of thinking rather than just kind of carefully parsing through things. And especially when we consider the social aspect of the internet, and how seeing, okay, this person liked this status, I don't like this person, therefore I don't like this status. And like that is really a major problem in a lot of Christian culture, is just kind of trying to think carefully and wisely about things rather than letting kind of our animosities and our associations, guilt by associations, do our thinking for us. So I think that's one thing that we're all kind of dealing with in one way or another. I think another way is just through the way that many of these technologies kind of stir up discontentment and a feeling of dislocation.
Hmm.
So whether that's, you're getting on your app and you see pictures of beautiful families and everyone just is smiling and loving each other, and even if you're not consciously thinking this in the moment, it kind of lodges in the back of your head, that's not me. Like,
Yeah.
that's not my family. Something
Yeah.
must be wrong with me.
Hmm.
And so this sense that there's something wrong with my life because it doesn't look like this perfectly consumable package, and all the while you're not even conscious of the fact that, this was a photo that was take number 16, and everybody had to be put in the right spot. Or even worse, Jen,
Yeah.
it's a sponsored post, and this was all created by some company as an advertisement. And so just the way that this kind of seeps into our emotional life, I think is
Mm.
another way. And one other thing I talk about in the book is, we're very conscious of, purity online, and we know what that means, and we know the importance of consuming the right thing, not the wrong thing. But I don't think enough of us have considered that the act of consumption itself
Yeah.
is a problem, and we're living very consumptive lives. And that's what I mean when I say in the book that the web is pornographically shaped. It doesn't just
Mm.
contain pornography that we need to avoid. It contains a logic to it, to where I can actually take people's lives and experiences, and I can kind of consume them. I
Yeah.
can consume their suffering. I can
Yeah.
consume
Ugh.
their questioning. I can even consume other people in a kind of weird friendship sort of way. Like I can watch people from afar and kind of imagine that I'm relationally close to them when I'm not. So I think those are three ways that the internet
Yeah.
has really challenged all of us, and is shaping us actively.
Well, and I absolutely see myself in all three. I mean, I
Mm.
am
Me
absolutely
too.
guilty of going, oh, she or he liked that. So therefore, or feeling
Right.
discontent or jealous of somebody else online and thinking there's something wrong with me or there's something wrong with them. And also just the consuming, sometimes I wonder, am I exploiting this person's suffering? Am I exploiting this story for my own
Hmm.
entertainment value or to make my own statement? I sometimes, frankly, just feel so paralyzed. You're a writer, you are somebody who contributes to public conversations on Twitter. I think you're a great Twitter follow. For anybody listening who has Twitter or X or whatever we're going to call it now. Samuel puts really thoughtful stuff out there, which is usually not the case on Twitter. So, um, you know, but even though this is where you and I work and live, and this is kind of our calling or whatever, everybody's doing that in some way. Most people are.
Hmm.
There's very few people who've said, I'm just completely offline all the time.
Right.
So my question for you, like I'm personally wondering, Samuel, how do you handle that? Or what do you say to yourself? I think, what are some of the things you rehearse, as somebody who comes up with ideas, thoughts, and opinions and puts them out there? Why do you decide at the end of the day that it's worthwhile rather
Hmm.
than retreat? What is that tipping point for you that makes you
Hmm.
stay?
Yeah, I think that's an important thing for everyone to think about. And I want to be careful here, because some people will listen to this and think, I just want a quick answer. I want a pat answer.
Yeah.
Just tell me what to
Yeah.
do and I'll do it. And I
Hmm.
understand that. And
Hmm.
but the reality is that, Jen, you and I and everyone listening to this God has given people in our lives that can help us see our own hearts and our own sinful proclivities and what we need better than any blogger or podcast can do, or
Mm,
any even a book. So honestly, I think the first thing I would say is that to the extent that me or anyone else can kind of interrogate the people around us who are in community with us and say, hey, do you think I'm using this well, or do you think I need to
yeah.
kind of pull back, or do you think what I'm saying here is true and fair, or do you think I need to kind of rethink this? I think that kind of transparency is really important. But for the ones who do stay, for the ones who try to contribute to kind of online conversation in this way, I think one of the reasons we do it is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is the fact that we just live in a digitally connected world. And this is simply true of the vast majority of our neighbors. Like
Yeah.
they are inhabiting these spaces. They're thinking kind of internet shaped thoughts. And so the challenge is, well, how am I faithful in Babylon? Right? How
Mm,
can I be faithful in this space? And so I feel like the Lord has, at least for this season, has kind of helped me see that the message in the Digital Liturgies book and kind of what I write about online, I'm writing to myself as much as anyone else. I'm writing reminders about what it means to think wisely and to think like a Christian. And so I'm constantly having to be called to repentance. I'm constantly having to kind of check myself against I didn't write this book because I'm an expert. I don't write anything because I've aced it. This is all kind of scripture that I'm preaching to myself, and maybe this brings somebody else in to consider these things for the first time. But I think we're just kind of living in light of the world that we're in, and we're trying to be faithful to Christ in our generation. That's all we can do. We can't turn back the clock. We can't get in a time machine. We can't put Pandora back in her box. The most we can do is to be faithful with what Jesus has given us in the time that in which he's placed us.
that's really good. You're preaching a good sermon there. And so often on this podcast, we cover current events and trends through a Christian lens. And so a lot of the times, I'm dealing with big things, maybe it's mental health or suicidality or, gender roles or misogyny. I mean, it feels like sometimes where these big concepts. And so often the conversation comes back to what you just said, is that God is faithful and he's given us a community, and it's important to know and be known. And it's important to just be shaped by the word of God and the people of God and the spirit of God. So I appreciate that. And you're right. There's just no pithy answer to that. And it comes back to just being faithful with what the Lord has given us. Let's take a little break from this really deep heart work that we're doing here. Let me ask you a couple lighthearted questions. I would
Great.
love to know what you think about Twitter turning into X, what you think about threads, and I really would like to talk to you about what you think about Chat GPT.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Well, tell you what, give me a minute and I'll type what should I say about X or threads into Chat GPT, and I'll just read that
Okay.
back to your listeners.
Okay, let's do
Uh,
it.
yeah. Yeah. So about Twitter and X, like it feels to me, it feels a little bit to me like, I don't know. I don't know how to say this. We can edit this out if it's no good.
We can.
I'm not trying. I just don't want to get in trouble for saying this. I
Mhm.
think Elon is going to sell. I think he
Mm.
will. I think what we're seeing is somebody who paid a lot of money for something that is just not that useful anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
It's not a money making venture, and I think all this rebranding is just trying to put lipstick on the pig.
Hmm.
And so I don't think that what we're seeing right now is how things are going to be in the next few years. I think we're going to see Twitter change hands in the not too
Sure.
distant future. And I could be wrong about that. And
Sure.
um,
Time will tell. But it's
yeah,
interesting, this piece of this technology, this place we go, this online platform where we gather that has been
yeah,
so addictive and has consumed us and
right,
we've consumed is now like, maybe on its way out. It's a good
yeah.
lesson.
Yeah, and Twitter, but Twitter is a unicorn because no other social media platform had this kind of weird relationship with journalism, which is why it
Right.
kind of became
Yeah.
the water cooler for evangelicals.
That's what I've said too.
Uh, and really there's no other platform that do it. And so to answer your second question about Threads, when Threads debuted and people were, jumping on it, and it was like, okay, Twitter's finished, like this is no well, so I saw a graph the other day that said, the first week Threads had 44 million active users. The second week it had 24 million active users, and the third week it had 13 million active users.
Oh
So
boy.
like the initial rush to join Threads has just completely died down, and
Funny.
we're seeing I think how, like, 2007, 2008, 2009, that's not coming back.
Mm.
The idea of starting this social media platform,
Hmm.
I think it's done. I don't think it's hard to generate interest in something that is Twitter derivative or Facebook derivative. And there's a reason TikTok is, the most used social media app in the world right now, I think, because it's different. It's video. It's,
Yeah.
it's just completely different. So,
Yeah.
so about Chat GPT, yeah, I've got some pretty like cranky views about Chat GPT.
Oh, me
I,
too. Welcome.
yeah,
Let's hear
yeah.
them.
I mean, I kind of think like, and I have buddies who disagree, but
Sure.
I'm kind of the opinion that I just think we ought to refuse to use this.
Yeah.
Like, I think we ought to just say no, no thanks. And I
Yeah.
I understand that it has some really valuable uses, especially for kind of the information industry and kind of parsing through, big data sets, and there's different kind of uses for it. But I mean, what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for the idea that this machine can think for us.
Mm.
And we're seeing people just kind of give themselves over to that and say, hey, like, we don't have to make art anymore. We don't have to make music anymore. We don't have to write sermons anymore. Like, we've got all of this stuff. And I think institutions and groups and colleges especially should just say, hey, like, we appreciate that this exists. We appreciate that we're not going to prevent it from existing, but as far as we're concerned, like, we're not gonna use this. We're gonna rely on human intellect and human ingenuity to create stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty cynical toward ChatGPT, and more cynical than a lot of my friends. I understand
Yeah.
the arguments for it, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, actually, I have the exact same experience. I'm far more cynical than a lot of my friends and my kids and the conversations that I have about it. I actually have not used it yet. I don't even know like where you go. I don't know. Is it chatgpt.com? Don't even answer that. I'm not sure. Because I have seen people use it and they're like, see how great that was? And my feeling is like you. I'm like, that machine just thought for you and
Yeah,
it would have benefited you to do the work on your own.
yeah,
And so, you and I are writers, so we value that process of thinking through how am I going to say something. So having a machine say it for me or anybody really grieves me. But something that, I have older kids than you and they have gone to a Christian high school, but it has made me so angry, Samuel. They have to have phones. There's
mm,
almost no way. I mean, it'd be a ridiculous process to get around not having a phone in the classroom
mm.
because in every class that they go to, they do different like games online, different like quiz drills or different,
Really?
programs that are online and they turn in all of their papers by scanning them with their phone. They turn them in electronically. They never
Wow,
give their teachers papers. Their teachers never give them papers. Um, and this is very typical. This is the normal, like my kids
wow.
aren't outliers. This is all the high schools, the vast majority of high schools. But as you said about college, I would love nothing more than okay, that's hyperbole. I would really like to see schools say, bring your paper and pencils, and that's how we're going to get it done today. And I think that's
Yeah,
exactly what needs to happen.
yeah. That's amazing about your kids' schools, like that. I'm
Yeah.
just trying to wrap my mind around that, and
Yes.
what a radical shift that is. And and I don't know. I'm sure you've seen the data on retention through physical note taking versus
Yes.
computer typing, and it's incredible the difference, how
Mm,
much better students retain stuff when they take longhand notes.
yeah,
So it's like, okay, I think that should matter a little bit. Like, I think the
right.
convenience of the technology should probably not be the last word. So yeah, that's it. It makes you kind of eager for a different way.
It does. It does. I know. And as you said, we are maybe different from our peers, and I realize I sound like a really cranky old lady at this point, so I should just stop. But Samuel, thank you for this conversation. I appreciate in the book and in this conversation that you have been, really willing to look at what is beneficial and what is not beneficial, but also just let's have the conversation about how it's shaping us.
Mm,
Who are we becoming in this cultural moment? I think there's almost nothing more important than talking about that. How is our world shaping us, and what is God calling us to? He placed us in this time and place for a reason.
mhm.
And so we have to pay attention and exegete the world around us, and honor the Lord in the process and love our brothers and sisters. Can you close us with some gospel hope? I mean,
Yeah.
even in the course of our conversation, I'm, feel a little down about technology, and I don't want to leave. I don't want to stay there. So send us out with some gospel hope when it comes to this.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Um, what I've told people before is that as I did the research and did the work on this book, the one of the biggest things that I found was how perfectly Scripture anticipates all of these dynamics. And it's because the Lord knew that this technology was coming. He knew what we would do with it. He permitted this to be created, and in fact, there is a Godwardness to this technology. It's made from the things that He put in the ground. He's sovereign over it. Um, but I think what I took away from that was that for all of the things that we have to think through that seem to be unique to this digital age, uh, all of the wisdom that we need is in Scripture. It anticipates all of this so perfectly. All of the things that I talk about in the book were in the Scriptures first, and I think it's really important to believe that, to feel in our bones that Christ is Himself the fullness of God's wisdom for us, and that we can walk wisely. It's not impossible. It's not a question of, well, if I become this overwhelmed by secular culture or technology, then I won't know what to do. No, Christ Himself, Christ in us, the hope of glory, He became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification. So I would really just urge everyone, regardless of what your past looks like with this technology, where are you kind of on this journey? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to change? Just embrace the fact that the wisdom of Scripture is completely sufficient to live wisely and faithfully in this digital age, because it is.
That is a good reminder. God's word will never pass away. May we
No.
hold tightly to it. Samuel James, thank you for this conversation. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to All Things, where we look at current events and cultural trends through a Christian lens. All things were created through Jesus and for Jesus, so we're seeking to apply His word to what's happening here and now.